When you have a history of greatness, the real challenge starts after the finish line.
I can taste triumph with the heart of a lion.
When victory alone isn't enough, you chase something greater, no matter how difficult the path. On the dirt, in the sand, and beyond. The new 2024 Ridgeline, Passport, and Pilot, part of our most rugged trail sport lineup yet. From Honda.
Hello and welcome to Bayou Time News. I'm your host, Tanner McGee. We have some very exciting guests today. Good schedule, and Jerome Zeringue. Representative Zeringue, great to have you back on the show. How are you doing today?
Yeah, as one of the non-good guests, I'm happy to be here, Representative McGee.
You're all good guests. I was just saying you're a special good guest. You're kind of the downfall of, not downfall, but the downtime of the legislative session.
Oh, you could say I'm the downfall of the legislature.
It's all a matter of perspective.
Yeah.
And so y'all have some downtime right now. You're not engaged in the day-to-day legislative process. But downtime, as I know, is not really downtime. Y'all are still busy. Y'all have meetings going on. You're at the Capitol addressing issues and kind of preparing for the next session on that kind of angle. There's been talks about the budget. What does the budget outlook look like? Where's money? What are we looking at?
Well, last week we had a JLCB meeting, Joint Legislative Committee of the Budget, where the Senate Finance and the Appropriations Committee meet, and that's when the administration gives their projection, their 5-year outlook, and where we are in the budget. Typically, every month we get an update, and we won't know for sure until the December Revenue Estimating Conference meets. But right now, the projection is we'll have a deficit of somewhere around $360 to $370 million, and it's projected to be a deficit for the next 2 years, and which is better than what was expected in terms of if as you know, the quarter-cent sales tax is rolling off and the reallocation of the dollars, of which you were an integral part of reallocating those dollars from sales tax, auto sales tax, and going to infrastructure. That combined would have a potentially $800 million hit, but some of the things that we have done previously is going to soften that. So right now the projection is around 360, say 400 million, which is manageable. It's kind of like, in Europe, it's about, a $400 million budget compared to you would be about a 400,000 hit to your household income, which you can manage.
No, I could not manage at all. But, on that kind of line, I remember our first year we came in, we had like a $2 billion deficit, and me and you sat next to each other in the legislature. I remember, I think we got it down to, and I'm making up a number, like $126 million. And I remember Gene Reynolds going, well, that's close enough for me, and closing his books and walking out the chamber. I was like, man, that seems like a lot. But as you learn, $126 million on a budget that big is actually not that big.
Right, and having been on appropriations since I was in the legislature, $200 million deficit, which is a lot of money. I mean, we joke that we could find it in the seat cushions. You can look around in the cushions and deal with it. But frankly, through efficiencies, reducing some of the budgets of some of the agencies, you can address a $200 million deficit. And even with a $400 million deficit, I think that's something manageable. But the challenge is going to be, as you know, the teacher pay raise has been it hasn't been incorporated into the overall budget because it's kind of less a supplemental pay, which is much to the chagrin of the teachers. But if they make it permanent, which I think everyone agrees should happen, that's going to add another $200 million. So the budget deficit could be $600 million.
Right, and I know your wife is a former teacher, retired teacher. My parents are retired teachers. It's something that you and I have both cared a lot about. But at the same time, we always supported, or not always, but we supported the last round of not making it permanent because of our concerns going forward of if we made it permanent, what would the budget look like in that unknown? And so I think that was some kind of not a popular decision amongst teachers, and you might have got some grief at home. I know I got some grief from my parents, but as we also have responsibility to the state budget to make sure that the outlook is future. So that's kind of some good budgeting practice we actually did.
Well, it was based upon we knew we were going to be faced with a deficit the next year, the next fiscal year, and to what degree we weren't sure. And so that was an opportunity to get the teachers the money. But unfortunately, I mean, They would, and I agree, they would want it permanent. And it has been for the past 2 years a supplement. And I think ultimately we're going to work to where we can get it as a permanent increase.
Absolutely. It's something we wanted to do, but we just weren't sure about the financial picture of the state at that time.
Yeah.
Any other big things on the budget horizon that we can see? Is it after 2 years, or are we expected to have a back coming up of the budget, or is it supposed to be down for more than those 2 years?
Well, whenever there's a deficit, obviously that means you're spending more than what you have, with inflation and other things, the cost of doing business goes up. And the unfortunate reality is when the economy is bad, people rely on government more and government services. So that's going to put a bigger strain. So we anticipate that there's going to be issues with how we're going to deal with the deficit, and how we're going to address some of the needs. But they're anticipating, we think there might be a budget, might be some special sessions to address some of the tax and budget issues. And we can talk about that in a bit. But I think some of the things that they're doing right now, the Speaker and the President of the Senate are asking the chairman of the committees, Ways and Means, Fiscal, House, and Appropriations, and the Money Committees in the Senate, to start holding committee hearings, and we're starting to do that, interviewing the agency heads, looking at ways that we can maybe try to create some efficiencies within the existing budget, reduce the overall budget itself to see if we can make some cost savings there. And so we're having those in anticipation of what we believe is going to be somewhere between a $400 to $600 million deficit.
And I think that's the biggest part that maybe the public doesn't quite have a grasp of, is that the legislature wants to be the most efficient budget they possibly can, but that information really lies with the department heads, and those department heads want their budgets to be as big as they possibly can, so they are reluctant to share all their information about what their budget pictures actually look like. And it's a constant fight between the agency heads, fight might not be a word, but a constant tension between the agency heads and the legislature about trying to find accurate information about these budgets. And that's kind of what y'all do on a daily basis, and you're kind of tasked with doing that. But we're out of time for now. We're going to come back in another segment with Representative Zeringue.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by South Louisiana Bank. It's better when we bank together. Waits and Downer, attorneys at law. Terrebonne Ford, built Ford tough.
Welcome back to Bite Time News. We're with our very special guest, Jerome Zeringue, Representative Zeringue. Last time we were talking before the break about the budget and kind of where we are with deficits. Let's talk about how you might also address that. There's been some discussion about a special session coming up. What is the rumors? What is the kind of the outlook on a special session, and what would it be and what would it address?
Well, there's always been discussions about having special sessions. I mean, even our first term 8 years ago, in addressing the statutory and constitutional dedications. Statutory dedication we can address outside of a constitutional convention, but obviously the Constitutional Convention is required to address those constitutional dedications. And I think ultimately we're going to have to get there, and if we're going to fix how we budget and manage the budget of the state. I mean, there are things that we need to address and we can clean up. The unfortunate reality is I think what was proposed in the constitutional special session that was proposed was more of a condensed, just put it in the statute. And I think a lot of the legislators said, no, we need to look at it more in depth. So I think what they're proposing now, and it's not definite, they're talking about it, is I think Secretary Nelson is going to talk about trying to have a session to deal with tax, specifically the tax issues, that what we can do outside of a constitutional convention to prepare for this fiscal session, which is going to deal with taxes. We only have every other year that we can deal with taxes to this degree when a fiscal session. So I think there will be one prior to that, or they're talking about having one to discuss those issues.
And has Secretary Nelson shared with y'all any kind of detailed plans or even broad plans or what he wants to do with taxes? I mean, what does that look like?
He's intimated on certain things. He hasn't been specific in terms of what he'd like to do. Again, when he was running for governor, I think he still proposes and advocating for eliminating personal income tax and some other things that I think we need to address or could address. That is going to be a long-term issue. You can't create a $4 billion hole in the state budget and eliminate personal income tax overnight. So I think there are things that are going to have to be done in terms of looking at corporate taxes, and I think there's some discussion, and we've always talked about this, in trying to provide more local control where the locals will, who have a better perspective on how the money should be collected and spent, putting that more control back into the local governments as opposed to the state. They collect it, send it to the state, and the state remits it back to these local entities. So those are some of the things that I think they're going to try to address.
One of the things I've heard critics talk about the special sessions on taxes and possibilities of where Secretary Nelson and the administration wants to go is that they'd be looking to get rid of the exemption for groceries and pharmaceuticals. Is that something that's actively being discussed, or is that just sort of the critics trying to poke holes in the plan before it gets off the ground?
Well, it's not so much the critics poking holes, but I think we need to look at, and honestly look at, what has happened in the past and what got us to this point. We talked about the Stelly plan, and there were some whole aspects of the Stelly plan. And if the Stelly plan was still enacted, we wouldn't have the problems or issues we have right now. And when we were doing better after the Katrina bump, when Jindal was in there, they repealed, or so they said, they repealed the Stelly plan. But they repealed certain portions of the Stelly plan, but they kept in some advantageous aspects that helped people. And quite frankly, it didn't tax food and drugs, and it didn't eliminate, which previously was taxed. So I think they're looking at maybe going back into saying, well, you know, we had that break for a while. The Stelly plan, we didn't eliminate it to put it back the way we were if we were eliminating Stelly, and in looking at a possible way to address some of the deficit with, you know, no one likes to pay taxes. I get it, but unfortunately, there's no free chicken, and you have to look at how we're going to address these issues and these budget issues and how to pay for it.
Yeah, and look, that's something that it always frustrated me. You say everybody should pay the taxes. I agree, and everybody should pay a fair and equal share. And it always bothered me that we couldn't get anything done on a vehicle, on an electric vehicle fee or tax of some kind, because what you're seeing now is if you own a Tesla or another electric vehicle, you're not paying the gas tax. And the guy that owns a regular gasoline truck like I do and you do, we're paying the gasoline tax. And to me, the gasoline tax is what provides for roads and bridges. That's the main revenue for roads and bridges. Mm-hmm. It seems like it's unfair that you're letting a population base get away with not paying anything, contributing anything at all other than to that burden. And is there any talk or discussion about revisiting putting some sort of fee on the electric vehicle?
And we talked about that this past session, and there is going to be continued discussions on how we do that as electric cars become more popular and people are using more and more. There's no doubt that they have to be participating in how we maintain roads and bridges. And unfortunately, like you said, they're not. So that's something that has been discussed and something I'm sure will continue to be discussed.
Yeah, and I always thought let's do it now while it's not that popular, because the more popular it gets, the harder it's going to be to institute a fee or a tax on an electric vehicle that the public won't be upset about. I just think that you had some people who were purists who were maybe more politically ambitious, and they wanted to say they never voted for a fee when they ran for higher office than doing what was right saying and having fairness for all of us. I know you didn't. That's not an accusation of you because I sat next to you. But I think it's something y'all need to look at going future. We have about a minute left. So while we're talking about that, let's touch on maybe some road and bridges conversation. We'll come back for insurance in the next segment. What is the status of road and bridges? We see a lot of social media activity in Louisiana about roads and bridges. What does it look like going forward right now? Well,
despite the issues we have with a couple of the bridges here in Terrebonne Parish that seem to be delayed, Robinson Canal and the one in Berg, there has been an interest in terms of reallocating some dollars and putting more money in. We have this past session in putting several $100 billion to address the backlog. And we're looking at, again, when the auto sales tax, if in fact it's going to be, they're looking at maybe using some of that to reduce the deficit, but putting that to more roads and funding for more roads and bridges will help address some of those concerns.
That was a very quick overview, but we're going to go more in depth with insurance when we come back with Jerome Zeringue. We'll be right back.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Alford and Associates for all of your insurance needs. CIS, Cardiovascular Institute of the South, the highest quality cardiovascular care available. Barker Honda, the Barker family tradition of quality.
All right, welcome back. I am Tanner McGee again with Representative Zeringue. Representative Zeringue, we were talking about the budget and taxes before the last break, but let's switch gears a little bit and talk something I know is really important to the viewers back home, which is insurance. Louisiana's just been suffering with property insurance rates for a long time now. I know y'all having meetings. You're having lots of meetings, actually, like 4 different special committees meeting basically on this issue. Y'all did some stuff, but y'all didn't do a whole lot of stuff. What's it look like? Where are y'all? Give us kind of an update on that.
Well, obviously, it's an issue that we need to address, especially here on the coast. It's affecting people's ability to return to their homes, or, I still get calls from people who are complaining about they're still trying to work things out with their insurance companies. For mine, it's been, over 2 years, and I think it's a problem that is not going to be remedied with some of the proposals that we have, simply because, as you know, insurance is a private business, and we can't necessarily legislate them to do the right thing or force them, because simply they can take their business and go write insurance somewhere else. So I think the commissioner is working to try, in good faith, come up with some solutions that work from the business aspect, but also for the policyholders themselves, because insurance right now is, in terms of cost, exorbitant. And, I get calls all the time that it's more than my mortgage and I can't afford it. And a lot of people are self-insured or not even getting any insurance. So some of the proposals that they have had and working to try to make it better for, or incentivize insurance companies to come, or still haven't passed. Some of the things that we have worked on in terms of fortified roofs and working on trying to get some things that will help the homeowners are going to continue to be supported. We put more money to those efforts, and I think it's going to be a combination of that, but also we're going to have to address the business aspect. How do you legislate private business interest? And that's where it's somewhat difficult.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. It's a much more complicated issue than I think it even appears on the surface when you start sitting in these meetings. One of the things that I think is an issue is we just need some time without a hurricane, right? I mean, we just need some time to recover. We got Zeta, Laura, Ida. I mean, it's been years of direct issues. Has there been any kind of conversation on? I know we originally passed like a $45 million incentive to insurance companies to write here. Have y'all putting more money in that, or are y'all moving away from that? What's that look like?
Well, personally, I don't think it has the return on investment, the ROI that, I think Commissioner Donnellan before was really big on that. And I think there are some things that in a way can help, but long term, that's not the solution. If it gets a few people come in and write some insurance in the short term, that helps. I think we need to do some things with the Louisiana in terms of the last resort in terms of the insurance that we do have here in Louisiana, and making that a bit more user-friendly, and working with private interest in combination of that. And maybe, Louisiana insurance can take the first hit and then private can come after. And I think there's some alternatives that are being discussed that works with business to allow people to get affordable insurance. But if there's a willingness to do those things, it's going to be difficult. Everybody talks about the Florida model, but the Florida model, I think they're having issues in Florida right now. It's a cost of insurance, it's crazy in Florida. The difference between Florida and in Louisiana, we have a greater risk. The highest probability of a storm making landfall, a named storm, once it enters the Gulf of Mexico, is southeast Louisiana. So from the risk perspective, we have a higher risk. Also, the population. We're a poor state. There's a lot more people in Florida. There's a lot more interest by the insurance companies to saying they can write off, or they have more policies to write to offset some of that. So we have several factors working against us here in Louisiana that'll make it difficult to resolve the insurance issue.
Yeah, I mean, frankly, we just need more people move to the states so they can spread the risk out. Right now, as our population has kind of been at a standstill, slight decrease, as that happens, it gets more and more expensive for the people who stay there. If you get more people coming in, that risk gets spread out across a much bigger population.
Yeah, well, heard yesterday that Florida is gaining a population of 1,000 people per month. We lost over 11,000 people last year in Louisiana, and we're continuing to lose people. And with insurance rates the way they are, and some of the things that we do, some of the problems that we do have, we don't address, that trend will continue, unfortunately. But I think we are making strides. We're looking at ways to, again, improve the economy, improve the budgeting process, and looking at ways to turn this around.
And look, and you also saw it with redistricting. You saw the population that we did have is really moving south up to I-10 and north down to I-10. And that's still very much a dangerous area for hurricanes. We do need to work on getting population both south for us, but as a statewide up in the northern areas, because those homes are actually more safer than, from a hurricane perspective, to help spread our risk for us down here. And I think we need to start looking at those kind of economic realities as well.
They are, and as you know, in rural Louisiana, North Louisiana, unemployment rates of 15+%, it's really high. And getting businesses and offsetting, as you indicated, that I-10-12 corridor, where concentration of people where, because quite frankly, 2/3 of the population live below I-12, and a lot of the economy and business of Louisiana is within that corridor. So it's difficult in North Louisiana and trying to get some things done. But there are some efforts to try to address that as well, because it's in Louisiana's best interest to help them as well.
Yeah, and look, I mean, this is not an apology for our roads. Terrebonne actually has like a C rating when it comes to roads and bridges. The rest of the state, we're a total of an F. So I mean, if I know our residents don't like it, I don't like it either. We need to be an A. But it gets worse outside of Terrebonne and Lafourche when you start really driving around the state.
It does.
And we appreciate all the stuff you do for the state. You've done a great job, and I want to thank you for being the best seatmate I ever had. And that's all for time for Representative Zeringue. We'll be back with some more guests on Bayou Time News.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Terrebonne General Health System. Your health is our legacy. Rouse's, you're either local or you're not. Buick, the craft of modern luxury. St. Martin and Bourke, know your rights.